Imagine for a moment stepping outside your front door. It is -40 degrees. You have no thick winter coat, no central heating, no app to order emergency groceries, and biologically speaking, you look like a hairless, overgrown, fleshy chicken. Oh, and your neighbor is a saber-toothed cat who hasn't eaten since Tuesday, while a 2-ton short-faced bear is currently deciding if you are worth the calories. Welcome to the Pleistocene epoch. Nature wanted us dead. We absolutely refused. The Ice Age was not just a chilly period in Earth's history. It was a ruthless planetary-scale filter. For roughly 2.5 million years, massive glaciers advanced and retreated, turning our world into a chaotic freezer. Most species approach this problem with common evolutionary sense. Mammoths grew dense, shaggy fur. Cave bears bulked up with massive layers of insulating fat. And what did Homo sapiens do? We stayed naked. Well, relatively speaking, evolution in its infinite irony equipped us with the exact opposite of what you would want in a blizzard. We are a tropical species. We sweat profusely to cool down. We have zero natural insulation, and our most prominent feature is a highly metabolically expensive brain that requires 20% of our daily calories just to keep the lights on. By all biological metrics, the Ice Age should have been our finale. We should be nothing more than a curious layer of frozen fossils for some other, far more sensible species to dig up. But instead of growing fur, we opted for something far more dangerous: severe anxiety and unparalleled ingenuity. We outsourced our survival. But how do you outsmart a glacier? It turns out surviving the deep freeze required a bizarre combination of physics, high-fashion tailoring, and an almost sociopathic willingness to live inside the rib cages of our enemies. To understand how we made it out alive, we have to look at the first, and arguably most important, life hack of the frozen world. So let's talk about the original extreme makeover, and how a tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of bone fundamentally altered the trajectory of human history. The miracle of the sewing needle. We didn't just invent clothes, we invented tailoring. If you take a raw animal hide and simply drape it over your shoulders, you are going to freeze to death. It is a common misconception that early humans just walked around looking like they were wearing poorly fitted blankets. A draped hide leaves gaps, wind gets in, body heat gets out, and hypothermia takes you before nightfall. The Neanderthals, our heavily muscled cousins, survived brutal conditions partly because of their robust, heat-retaining physiology. But Homo sapiens were lanky, tall, and entirely ill-suited for the cold. We needed a technological marvel. We needed the needle. It changed everything. Around 30,000 years ago, someone, somewhere, figured out how to carve a tiny sliver of bone, pierce a microscopic hole in one end, and thread it with animal sinew. It sounds incredibly basic to us now, but the eyed needle is one of the most devastatingly effective pieces of technology in human history. It allowed our ancestors to stitch hides together tightly, creating windproof, waterproof, multi-layered garments. We are talking about tailored thermal underwear, insulated pants, and fitted parkas complete with fur-lined hoods. We didn't grow fur, we stole it. And then we customized it. This micro-environment of trapped body heat allowed a tropical ape to colonize the Arctic Circle. The needle was our passport to the rest of the planet. But even the best North Face jacket made of wolf skin won't save you when the blizzard lasts for 3 weeks. You cannot just wear your survival, you have to build it. Which brings us to the architectural madness of the Ice Age mind. You need shelter, but there are no trees. The Mammoth Steppe was a vast, unforgiving tundra stretching from modern-day Spain all the way across Eurasia to Canada. It was a bleak, freezing grassland. Timber was virtually non-existent. Caves were great, but they were often already occupied by literal monsters. So what do you do when you need a house but you have no building materials? You build your house out of meat, or rather the leftovers. In places like modern-day Ukraine and Russia, archaeologists have unearthed some of the most haunting and brilliant structures ever conceived by human minds: mammoth bone houses. These were not just random piles of bones, they were meticulously engineered structures. Our ancestors would take the jawbones of woolly mammoths and interlock them in a circle to form a solid foundation. They would then use the massive leg bones as support pillars and the curved, sweeping tusks to create a domed roof structure. Finally, they would stretch heavy animal hides over the top of the skeletal framework, sealing it with mud and turf. Inside, they dug hearths for fire. It was incredibly well insulated, it was highly functional, and psychologically speaking, it is deeply unhinged. Imagine the sheer audacity required to slay a 6-ton beast, eat its flesh, and then use its skull as your living room furniture. It is the ultimate flex against nature. We were tiny, fragile creatures, but we slept comfortably inside the rib cages of the apex herbivores we had just conquered. But to get those bones, and to get the thousands of calories required to fuel our shivering, overheated brains, we had to go grocery shopping. And in the Ice Age, the groceries fought back. Hunting a mammoth is a terrible idea. Let's be clear about the physics of this situation. You weigh perhaps 150 pounds. The woolly mammoth weighs 12,000 pounds. It has a hide 2 inches thick, a layer of fat 3 inches thick, and tusks that can flip a modern pickup truck. Taking it down with a sharpened stick is mathematically absurd. We were outmatched. So we cheated. Our ancestors did not fight fair. We survived because we were the most cowardly, pragmatic, and ruthless hunters the world had ever seen. We didn't charge directly at megafauna. We used our brains to bypass their brawn. We invented the Atlatl, or the spear thrower. It is essentially a stick with a hook on the end that holds a dart or a spear. By using the Atlatl, a human arm is artificially lengthened, adding an extra joint of leverage. The physics are terrifying. A spear thrown by an Atlatl can reach speeds of over 100 miles per hour. It carries enough kinetic energy to punch through thick hide, dense fat, and deep muscle. We transformed ourselves from close-range brawlers into long-range artillery. We could stand at a safe distance and launch armor-piercing projectiles at animals that had no evolutionary defense against flying sticks. But weapons were only half the equation. We also used the landscape as a weapon. Entire herds of bison or wild horses were driven off cliffs by coordinated groups of humans screaming and waving torches. We manipulated stampedes. We chased animals into deep mud or bogs where their immense weight became their own worst enemy, trapping them while we casually walked up and finished the job. We were not the strongest animals on the tundra. We were just the most manipulative. But the physical tools, the tailored clothing, the bone houses, and the aerodynamic spears, none of these would have worked without our final, most profound, and entirely invisible survival hack. It is the reason you are listening to this right now. We survived the cold because we couldn't stop talking. Humanity's greatest survival mechanism was never the spear, it was the story. The Ice Age was deeply traumatizing. The margins for error were zero. If you ate the wrong berry, you died. If you misread the weather, you died. If you forgot the migration patterns of the reindeer, your entire family died. A single human brain cannot store enough data to survive that level of environmental hostility. So, we networked our brains together. Fire was our first internet. When our ancestors gathered around the hearth inside their mammoth bone huts, they weren't just keeping warm, they were uploading data. They were gossiping. They were telling stories. Knowledge is weightless. Through language, we could simulate reality. An elder could explain exactly how to find water during a deep freeze, or how to read the subtle changes in the wind that meant a blizzard was coming, without the younger generation having to experience it firsthand and die in the process. We are the only species that can learn from the mistakes of people who are already dead. This intense social cohesion completely rewired our psychology. Empathy became a biological imperative. In the brutal calculus of the Ice Age, an individual is useless. A tribe is invincible. We evolved to care deeply about the opinions of our peers because in the Pleistocene, being ostracized and kicked out of the tribe meant freezing to death alone in the dark. This is why, to this day, public speaking terrifies us more than physical pain. Our brains are still hardwired to believe that social rejection equals literal death. We are incredibly paranoid, highly cooperative, intensely anxious apes because the relaxed, solitary apes didn't make it through the winter. We even kept the injured and the elderly alive, a practice virtually unheard of in the wild. Archaeologists have found skeletal remains of early humans who survived for years without teeth or with crippled legs. They couldn't hunt. They couldn't chew their own food. But they were kept alive, their food pre-chewed for them by the tribe. Why? Because they were libraries. An elder who had lived through a 50-year climate cycle knew where the emergency water was. Keeping them alive wasn't just an act of compassion, it was a strategic necessity. Empathy was our ultimate competitive advantage. Looking back, our survival makes absolutely no sense. We were a tropical species trapped in a global freezer entirely unsuited for the world we found ourselves in. We were soft, slow, and weak, but we were also incredibly stubborn. We didn't adapt to the environment, we forced the environment to adapt to us. We draped ourselves in the skins of our predators. We built fortresses out of the bones of our prey. We used the laws of physics to turn sticks into missiles, and we used the power of language to bind our minds together into a collective superorganism. Every time you put on a jacket, every time you sit around a fire with friends, every time you share a story to warn someone of danger, you are echoing the exact insane survival hacks that kept your ancestors breathing in a world of ice. We are the descendants of the paranoid, shivering apes who learned how to sew, how to share, and how to conquer a frozen planet. And when you think about it that way, a hairless, overgrown, fleshy chicken doesn't seem quite so helpless after all.